Money doesn't change people. It just turns the volume up. And suddenly, everyone who's been silent for years finds their voice. There's something almost theatrical about funerals, my friends. The black outfits, the carefully timed tears, the long hugs from people who couldn't bother to text back when it actually mattered. And this story? Oh, this one doesn't smell like flowers. It smells like inheritance, entitlement, and fake grief with a hint of desperation. So before we go any further, grab a coffee or whatever drink you love and sit with me through this absurd story. Trust me, you'll want to be fully awake for this. Welcome, my favorite little secret keepers. You're watching Lying Whispers, where nothing stays buried, not even family drama.
Stay until the end.
You'll have opinions. I promise. Let me introduce you to Eleanor Hartley. No, she's not a spoiled heiress. No designer childhood. No glamorous backstory. Eleanor was rich in the quiet way. The kind of rich that comes from survival, not privilege. She was 32, single, emotionally exhausted, and freshly grieving the only person who ever truly showed up for her. Her grandmother, Margaret Hartley. Margaret raised Eleanor from the age of 6. Why 6? Because Eleanor's parents believed living their own lives mattered more than raising a child. Translation: they vanished. Margaret didn't.
She stayed.
School plays, doctor visits, broken hearts, long nights when Eleanor cried for parents who were physically alive and emotionally absent. Family, my friends, is about presence, not blood. Remember that. The funeral was crowded. Too crowded. Eleanor sat in the front row, hands folded, eyes tired. She had already cried all the tears she had. What she didn't expect was the sudden appearance of relatives she barely recognized. Aunt Linda, Cousin Robert, Uncle Thomas, who once sent a birthday card 10 years late with the wrong name. They arrived like vultures with good manners. Overly tight hugs. Soft voices. We should have been closer. We always cared. She loved us so much. Really? Because Margaret never mentioned them. Not once. The narrator pauses here, takes a sip of coffee, raises an eyebrow. My friends, when people only show up when there's a will involved, they don't miss the person. They miss the money. 3 days later came the reading of the will. Classic setup. Cold office. Heavy silence. Legal tension thick enough to chew. The lawyer cleared his throat. Eleanor stared at the floor. She already knew what Margaret wanted.
They had talked about it. Calmly. Clearly.
Margaret believed in accountability. The lawyer read, "To my granddaughter, Eleanor Hartley, I leave my home, savings, investments, and all remaining assets." Silence. The kind that stretches. The kind that reveals intentions. Aunt Linda gasped. Uncle Thomas shifted. Cousin Robert leaned forward like maybe he misheard. Then the second sentence. "To those who are absent, I leave my forgiveness, but no inheritance."
Oh.
Oh, Margaret. The narrator smiles slowly. That wasn't cruelty. That was clarity. That's when the whispers began. She manipulated her. This isn't fair. Family should share. She's selfish. Selfish. For honoring the wishes of the woman who raised her. Interesting definition. Eleanor didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't explain. She followed the will, exactly as written. And that's when the internet question was born. AITA for inheriting everything and not sharing with relatives who were never there? Money plus family equals war. Every time. But don't get comfortable yet, my friends. Because grief doesn't end with funerals. And entitlement doesn't disappear quietly. This story is just getting started. Next come the messages. The guilt. The pressure. And a family group chat no one asked for. So stay with me. They say grief brings families together. That's adorable and wildly inaccurate. Grief is just the opening act. What really unites people is money. Exactly 4 days after the will reading, Eleanor received the first message. Not a "how are you holding up?" Not a "we miss you." Just a perfectly timed "we need to talk." My friends, when someone says we need to talk, it's never about feelings. It's about leverage. The message came from Aunt Linda, sent at 712 a.m. because nothing says family love like pressure before breakfast. Sweetheart, we know this is a hard time, but Margaret always wanted the family to stay united. We don't think it's right for you to keep everything. Eleanor read it.
Didn't reply. Took a breath.
Silence can be powerful, but it never lasts long. Before she finished her coffee, another message popped up. Cousin Robert. It's not about the money, but well, actually it is. We're struggling. We're family.
Ah, yes.
The classic "this isn't about money" followed immediately by a detailed explanation of why it absolutely is. The narrator tilts her head. My friends, anytime a sentence starts with "it's not about the money is already packing a suitcase. And then the real villain entered the story. The group chat.
Yes.
That group chat. Hartley family. Already suspicious. Eleanor was added without warning because consent tends to disappear when inheritance is involved. Messages flooded in.
She wouldn't want this. We all deserve something.
Blood is blood. What will people think? Yes, people. That invisible jury that never pays bills but always has opinions. Eleanor watched the chaos quietly.
She hadn't changed.
The money hadn't changed her. What changed was how everyone else suddenly saw her. She went from quiet granddaughter to family villain overnight. And when guilt didn't work, they escalated. Private message from Uncle Thomas. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. That one landed. Not because it was true, but because it was cruel. Margaret had been clear. Painfully clear. The narrator exhales slowly. My friend's emotional manipulation always borrows someone else's voice. That night, Eleanor sat alone and asked herself the question everyone online loves to ask. AITA for not sharing? AITA for keeping what the woman who raised me intentionally left me? She almost typed a careful, diplomatic reply. Almost. But then something arrived that changed everything. An email. Subject line legal options. From a lawyer Eleanor had never met, representing 3 relatives who suddenly remembered her existence. They were going to challenge the will. Impugn it. Force a split. The narrator smiles slowly. Because once someone threatens legal action, they stop being family and start being a case file. Eleanor didn't argue. Didn't plead.
Didn't explain.
She made one call. To Margaret's lawyer. And that, my friends, is when this story stops being emotional and starts being documented. Because Margaret didn't just leave money. She left records. Letters.
Dates. Receipts.
Some people leave money behind. Others leave memories. And then there are legends who leave documentation. When Eleanor walked into Margaret's lawyer's office, she expected legal language and polite sympathy. What she didn't expect was a stack of folders thick enough to tell a story on their own. The lawyer placed them gently on the desk. This isn't just a will, he said. It's a record. And right there, my friends, Eleanor realized her grandmother didn't just plan for death. She planned for audacity. Inside the folders were letters, printed emails, missed call logs, notes written in Margaret's neat, deliberate handwriting. Not angry, not dramatic, just honest. One letter was dated 12 years earlier. I called my son today. No answer. Eleanor was sick again. We managed. Another. I invited the family for Christmas. No one came. Eleanor helped me decorate the tree. She said it felt full enough. The narrator pauses here. My friends, you can fake tears. You can't fake timelines. Margaret hadn't written these notes to accuse anyone. She wrote them so no one could rewrite history later. Another page. I don't write this out of bitterness. I write it so no one can say I didn't try. Oh, Margaret. Leaving emotional receipts like a woman who knew exactly how this would play out. The lawyer explained that everything had been legally attached to the will. In case of dispute, which means yes. She knew. She knew the absent relatives would show up. She knew they would cry unfairness. And she made sure the truth would already be waiting. The narrator smiles, slow and satisfied. My friends, this isn't cold-hearted. This is foresight. Meanwhile, the Hartley family group chat was spiraling. She's ignoring us because she knows she's wrong. Lawyers are manipulating her. This isn't over. Eleanor read the messages once, then muted the chat. She sent a single reply. I'm following the will. No explanations. No apologies. No heart emojis. And the group exploded. Long paragraphs without punctuation. Voice notes filled with forced tears. Sudden appeals to faith, family, and conveniently financial hardship. The narrator sighs. My friends, when someone mixes religion, family, and bills in one argument, logic has already left the room. That night, Eleanor asked herself again. AITA for standing firm? AITA for not negotiating with people who never showed up? But this time, the question felt different. Because now it wasn't just her memory against theirs. It was evidence. Margaret had spoken. Clearly. Thoroughly. 2 days later, the official notice arrived. The family was formally contesting the will. Lawyers. Paperwork. Court dates. The war was no longer emotional. It was legal. But here's the delicious twist, my friends. Challenging a will doesn't just open assets. It opens the past. Courtrooms don't care about feelings. They care about patterns. And patterns, my friends, are ruthless. The Hartley family arrived together on the first court date. Coordinated outfits. Shared glances. That quiet unity people use when they want to look innocent without saying much. Eleanor arrived alone. No entourage. No performance. Just posture and calm. The narrator smiles here, knowingly. Confidence doesn't need backup. The family's lawyer opened strong. He talked about blood ties. About misunderstandings. About a grieving young woman being influenced. Classic strategy. Because when you can't erase the facts, you question the person presenting them. But then it was Eleanor's lawyer's turn. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He opened folders. First exhibit visitation records. 0 visits. Over more than 10 years. Second exhibit unanswered emails. Third phone logs. Fourth holiday invitations declined or ignored entirely. The courtroom shifted. Because absence, when documented, becomes very present. The narrator pauses. My friend's silence looks harmless until it's dated and signed. Then came the letters. Margaret's words filled the room without her voice ever rising. Not accusations. Observations. Dates. Attempts. Consistency. The judge leaned forward. Because this wasn't bitterness. This was a timeline. Then something unexpected happened. Cousin Robert asked to speak. Without consulting his lawyer. Dangerous move. He talked about Margaret being difficult. About how everyone was busy. About how life just got in the way. The courtroom stayed silent. The judge let him talk. And when Robert finished, the judge said something simple. Being busy is not a defense against abandonment. Oof. The narrator almost winces. At that moment, the narrative shattered. They weren't excluded. They opted out. And the court saw it. The ruling came swiftly. The will was valid. The challenge was denied. The inheritance remained untouched. No drama. No celebration. Just resolution. Eleanor didn't smile. She exhaled. Because winning like this doesn't feel like victory. It feels like confirmation. Outside the courtroom, the family scattered. No hugs. No statements. Just fractured pride and unanswered looks. Their biggest loss wasn't financial. It was exposure. That night, Eleanor returned to Margaret's house. She walked through rooms filled with memory, sat where they used to sit together. And for the first time since the funeral, she slept. But don't relax yet, my friends. Because losing publicly does something dangerous to people. It doesn't teach them humility. It teaches them resentment. Losing in court doesn't always end a conflict. Sometimes it just changes its shape. The Hartley family walked out of the courthouse with their heads held high, the way people do when they don't want the world to notice they've been humiliated. Publicly, they accepted the ruling. Privately, they weren't done. Eleanor felt it before she saw it. That strange quiet. That uncomfortable calm. The kind that doesn't feel peaceful, just watchful. The narrator lowers her voice. My friends, when drama goes silent, it's usually regrouping. The first sign came softly. A screenshot sent by a friend. A vague post on social media. No names. No accusations. Just implication. Funny how money reveals who people really are. Oh, please. The narrator rolls her eyes. Translation: I can't say it in court, but I hope you'll think it. Eleanor didn't respond.
Didn't comment.
Didn't block. Because reacting would have given the rumor oxygen. Then came the messages from strangers. People she barely knew. Distant connections. Friends of friends. Is everything okay? I heard something weird. Family issues, huh?
Yes.
The rumor phase. Because when people lose the truth, they weaponize the story. A few days later, something escalated. A letter arrived. Not an email. Not a message. A physical envelope. No return address. Inside, a single handwritten sentence. This isn't over. Eleanor sat down. Not because she was weak, but because the tone had changed. This wasn't guilt anymore. It was threat adjacent. The narrator exhales slowly. My friends, when pride gets bruised, logic tends to go missing. That week, Eleanor noticed things she hadn't before. A car parked across the street for too long. Someone leaving when she stepped outside. Missed calls with no voicemail. Nothing illegal. Nothing provable. But everything unsettling. Margaret had planned for greed. She hadn't planned for obsession. Eleanor called her lawyer again. Not to sue. Not to retaliate. To document. Photos. Dates. Times. Because Eleanor had learned something critical. People who lie once rarely stop. And then came the message that shifted everything. From Cousin Robert.
Short. Direct.
Carefully worded. We should talk. Just us. No lawyers. The narrator raises an eyebrow. My friends, when someone says no lawyers, what they really mean is no protection. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She thought about Margaret. About boundaries. About how silence had protected her before, but might not this time. And finally, she asked herself the last question that mattered. AITA for protecting myself even from my own family? She agreed to meet. In a public place. With witnesses nearby. Because intuition, too, is a kind of inheritance. And in part 6, my friends, that conversation reveals the one truth no one wanted to admit. Not about money. Not about the will. But about why they were never there in the first place. The cafe was busy. Too busy for secrets and just public enough to keep lies on a leash. Eleanor arrived first. She chose a table with her back to the wall. Some instincts don't come from fear. They come from experience. Cousin Robert arrived minutes later. No lawyer. No smile. No performance. The narrator tilts her head. My friends, when someone shows up like this, they're not here to win. They're here because the truth got heavy. I'm not here to ask for money, Robert said. That made Eleanor look up. Because that's exactly what everyone says right before they do. But he didn't continue in that direction. Instead, he sighed. Do you know why we were never around? Eleanor stayed silent. Silence invites honesty or exposes the lack of it. Robert stared at the table. Margaret asked us for something. Years ago. The narrator leans in. Oh. She asked us to choose. Margaret, it turns out, had set boundaries long before the will ever existed. She asked for presence. Consistency. Responsibility. No more showing up only when it was convenient. No more half-effort relationships. No more excuses. And the family? They didn't like that. Because showing up costs time. Caring takes energy. And love, real love, demands effort. So they chose distance. Not because of Eleanor. Not because of conflict.
Because it was easier.
When we realized we weren't in the will, Robert said quietly, "It wasn't about the money." Not at first. The narrator smiles knowingly. Of course it was. But then we understood what it really meant, he continued. It meant she saw us. And we didn't like what she saw. There it is. My friends, it was never about inheritance. It was about exposure. Eleanor felt something shift. Not relief. Not anger.
Clarity.
You weren't punished, she said calmly. You just weren't rewarded for something you didn't do. Robert didn't argue, because there was nothing left to defend. The conversation ended without hugs, without promises to reconnect, without fake closure. And that was okay. Not every ending needs reconciliation. Some just need truth. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded. The group chat died quietly. The vague posts stopped. The whispers found a new target. Because drama, without reaction, gets bored. Eleanor stayed. She stayed in Margaret's house, in Margaret's values, in the life they had built together. And for the first time since the funeral, she felt light. So now, my friends, the final question isn't just Eleanor's. It's yours. AITA for inheriting everything and not sharing it with people who were never there? Is family about blood or behavior? Does money buy forgiveness? Or does absence leave a permanent receipt? I'm dying to know. Comment below. My friends, tell me what you would have done in her place. AITA, or just accountability. Until the next secret surfaces, you know where to find me. This was Lying Whispers. And remember, money reveals.
Però sense proves.
And silence always tells a story.